welcome to Sober Dad Crew, the podcast where we talk about all things dad, sobriety, recovery, parenting, music, tattoos, and more. For more information or to get in touch, visit soberdadcrew.com. My guest this episode is Tawny Lara, who has written a book with very possibly the best title in the history of book titles. Yes, there's Grapes of Wrath, Tale of Two Cities, and lots of others, but to me, Dry Humping is the best book title ever. And I should also say she's the co-host of the Recovery Rocks podcast. Tawny, welcome to Sober Dad Crew.
Hello. That was probably my favorite intro I've ever had. So thank you.
Thank you. And I will say, I read your book in one sitting last Tuesday because I had a vasectomy on Monday. Had nothing to do but sit on a bag of peas. It's strangely related to the topic at hand. And so you sent me the review copy. It's like, I know what I'm doing. Put on the new Lana Del Rey album.
Yes.
Read your book with peas between my legs. So it's really incredible. And there's so many layers of awesomeness in there. I don't think we're even going to get to all of them. We will do our best.
I would love, I'm putting you on the spot, if you could leave a Goodreads review or Amazon review and just say read this book while recovering from my vasectomy.
I will. It is oddly related, right? Yeah. So there's no humping in my house right now, dry or otherwise.
Yeah.
I'm a little more of a recovery than I thought. And I also probably overdid it with work last week. Not that this is it's not the major topic of the show, but it does relate in the world of birth control and in the political environment in which we live, which is totally effed up from my humble perspective.
Yes.
So just to kick it off, can you just talk a little bit about your sober journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So I quit drinking November 30th of 2015. Real briefly, I was a party girl. I was a party girl bartender. I lived that really stereotypical bartender life. When I wasn't behind the bar serving drinks, I was in front of the bar ordering them or dancing on top of it. My whole life was in the bar, and I lived that life for 10 plus years. I grew up in Waco, Texas. And then fast forward to summer of 2015, I moved to New York City to pursue writing. And I'm sitting in a pub talking about how I don't have enough time to write. And there's something finally clicked in me where I left the pub, walking to the subway, and I was like, okay, I just spent 4 hours hanging out with my friends, talking about how I don't have enough time to write. And, my friends are talking about, I don't have enough time to audition, all this, we're all just kind of commiserating after working a day job, and something clicked on that walk home. Maybe there's something here. Maybe there's a connection. Maybe this alcohol is kind of in the way of my career. So it really came, my quote unquote rock bottom really came from having a couple beers and realizing, man, maybe alcohol's not doing me any favors. That was I kind of wish my rock bottom was more dramatic, but it wasn't. I partied really, really hard. But my last night drinking, it was just a couple beers. But that was really the impetus. And the next morning I woke up and I said, I'm not going to drink for a week. And then it was a month. And then my 30th birthday was coming up. And I was like, what if I don't drink for a whole year? I start a blog that documents what I'm doing. That'll hold me accountable both for not drinking, and it'll hold me accountable for writing. So I started this blog called sobrietyparty.com. And if you want to read some really, really cringeworthy early sober blogs, very earnest, that's where it is. That was really how it all started. It was supposed to be a year-long social experiment. And spoiler alert, it's been 7.5 years since I've had a drink. And I was 100% correct. Alcohol was absolutely standing in the way of my career, but being healthy, being happy, having healthy relationships, having good sex, having a good career, all of this stuff, alcohol really was standing in the way of that. 6 months into this social experiment, I realized I'm getting freelance pieces published. I'm happier. I'm sleeping better. I'm healthier. That's not to say it was easy. It was early sobriety is really, really hard. But even though it was hard, I was still healthier and happier. And I knew there was something in me that knew I needed to keep it going. I did not do AA. I didn't work a program. I mean, I created my own, I guess you could say, therapy, yoga, journaling, blogging. I did what worked for me. And that's really kind of what brought me to where I am today. Now I wrote a book, I have a podcast. I never would have thought in a million years that giving up alcohol would really unlock exactly what I wanted it to. I did, but I really didn't think that was going to happen. And that's essentially how I got to where I am today and became the internet sober sexpert. Because
not
I write
everybody
a lot about,
gets to be that.
not everybody. No, I'm very proud of that title. Ruby Warrington, who came up with the term sober curious, she wrote the book Sober Curious. She and I did a live event here in New York City, and she introduced me as the sober sexpert, and it stuck. I wear that with a badge of honor, and it's going to be on the cover of the book. Tawny Lara, the sober sexpert. So, like they say, when you quit drinking, you can live a life beyond your wildest dreams. 1,000%. That's what's going on right now.
Yeah, no, and I get that. I mean, there was the same thing for me. I never had what a lot of people consider this bad rock bottom, but I was a medicinal drinker. I mean, I'm 52 and probably could count on one hand the number of times I was drunk in my life, but it was always 2 glasses of wine, 3 glasses of wine. I had a very embarrassing professional moment, which was really like tied into alcohol and depression for me, where I snapped at the chair of the county legislature while I was doing a presentation. Could have been really professionally limiting. Had to have a really it was embarrassing. And fortunately, that was like a very gracious person, but it was not a comfortable moment, which I created, out of my own kind of not health. And I was like, yeah, I gotta not do this anymore. But I didn't do a program either. I did the therapist thing, which I needed because there's a lot of stuff I needed to kind of unpack. She always called it adult education, which I thought was
100%.
a super accurate thing. You're really just trying to learn about yourself and what it is that makes you struggle. Right. And at work, I felt like a lot of that imposter stuff that I always felt kind of faded away a little bit because I had a more realistic picture of who I am and was. And at that same time, I was getting divorced. So there's a lot going on there that's hot mess syndrome. I don't know if that's actually a formal psychological term, but it should be.
Yes, I think it should be. Or maybe that's going to be your book.
HMS, not to be confused with the HMS Pintafor or something like that. But so you might have to explain it. Did you always want to be a writer, or what was the motivation there?
I wrote for my local newspaper when I was 14, actually, because we're on Zoom, you can see, but these 2 framed pictures behind me, they're actually newspaper clippings from when I was I basically was writing op-eds when I was 14. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. But looking back, I'm like, wow, you were fucking doing it. Like I said, I grew up in Waco, Texas, but I was originally from Northern California. So I was raised by a strong, independent mom, single mom. And she empowered me to think for myself, which I'm really, really grateful for. So it was this weird dichotomy of growing up in a small Southern town, conservative town, and then having a mom who encouraged me to think outside the box and ask questions. And so that's really where, a lot of the journalism came from. And, you look at these articles that I wrote back then, I was writing about legalizing cannabis. I was writing about how we need proper sex education. I was writing about why are overweight women talked about that are on television and not overweight men? I was writing deeply political pieces. But I didn't really know. I was just, when you're that young, you don't really know what the hell you're doing. You're just kind of following your gut. And I did. And it was really cool. I got a lot of hate mail.
Did you save any of that?
I saved all of it. I'm really grateful. My mother kept a scrapbook of all of the newspaper clippings and all of the hate mail and the letters of appreciation. And I think at that age, like I said, I was 14, and that taught me that my words can have impact on somebody, whether it was a thank you for writing this letter or Bible verses as to why I'm going to hell for writing this letter. It made me realize the power of words. And that really, really stuck with me. So I explored journalism. I did some broadcast journalism here and there, but I really got all of that took a back seat when I found drugs and alcohol. Now I have the language to know that I was experiencing anxiety and PTSD and depression. I didn't know what the hell was going on at the time. I just knew that I didn't feel right, but alcohol numbed this really shitty feeling. So that's what I did for 13 years.
Yeah, and I think there's sort of layers to sobriety too, right? There's sort of, for me, I just stopped, but that's sort of, I don't know, I call it like the technical sober, like the removal of the substance, but there's the bigger emotional sobriety piece. And you talk about that in the book 100% too. And people find a lot of things. I got sober, I got divorced, I dated like an insane person. Part of that filled that endorphin thing. Oh yeah, like swipe. Well, and when I first started, there wasn't even Tinder. When I had been married, there wasn't like texting. So I came out into this weird, total strange world of like, oh, nobody introduces people to people anymore. You like get on the thing. Which I will say, I met my, fiance on Bumble. So there you go.
Love that.
But she's sober too. And that's such a fundamental, like key piece. That's part of what you talk about in your book is some people can date somebody who's sober or not. It really depends on your circumstance and the partner, but it was such and still is just a fundamental grounding piece for our family. We met during COVID too. So that was its own other, we were like old school. We talked on the phone and then we chatted and we went for walks, right? Like what could you do when you were supposed to like be kind of not with people, not in your bubble?
Yes.
But I'm actually kind of grateful for some of that because I feel like we had to get deep kind of fast to determine like, all right, we're in a pandemic, right? So if this is going somewhere, we're just going deep right away. And there's just so much value to that for me.
Well, especially because she's also sober, and I can relate. My partner is also sober, and that connection that we have, it's almost like we speak we're fluent in this language where I dated people that were not sober, and they were empathetic and they were kind, and they did their best to understand and be supportive, and it was great. But there is nothing like someone else who can understand what you went through, and it's just like you said, it's a really we got serious really fast because like I said, AA was not part of my story, but I went to a handful of AA meetings to try it out, and that's where we met. I met him in an AA meeting. So I joke that like I got what I needed out of AA.
Right, yeah.
I found my love. It's really powerful to have that. And it's not just because he's sober, but it's because, like you're saying, he's in recovery. Like he's in therapy. He's addressing his shit individually and together. We know that you don't just get sober and then everything gets better. It's actually quite the opposite. You have to work through a lot of uncomfortable stuff, and it's still going on. Like we're both 7+ years sober, and we're still unpacking stuff that we dealt with in childhood, teen years, early 20s. It's a lot of work, but it is 1,000% worth it.
It is. And I find my mom, my parents are in their 80s and my mom has Alzheimer's now. And so when the shit flies at you and you've dealt with your issues, it's hard and it's sad, but I feel like I'm grounded and can manage it and actually be like supportive to my dad, who's absolutely the primary caregiver. They live in Maine, so they're not near me. And I think the benefits are just so huge. I mean, I am where I am because of that decision 13 and years ago and some months. And it was really,
Yes.
it was very, and I say it in like the introduction is, I felt like my grandmother like came down and like tapped me on the shoulder and kind of was like, you're going the wrong way. And you
Mm,
look around like, and I'm grateful for that, because I felt not that it was easy, but it was easier than, like, I could just stop, right? Like I didn't need to detox, because
yeah.
people do
Same.
from
I didn't need
alcohol,
that
right?
either. It's I'm glad that you brought that up because it's like not everyone can just stop like we did. I know a lot of people need inpatient treatment. They need assisted detox and they need to go to rehab. They can't afford rehab. They like there's just I'm so fortunate to even be able to say that I got sober, because I had health insurance that had affordable therapy. I was able to go to the doctor and take care of my physical health. I had these resources that a lot of people don't have, which is what keeps them in the cycle.
Right. I'm actually on the board of an organization, Alcohol and Drug Council of Tompkins County, and we're about to open a 40-bed detox. And
Mm,
it's this incredible place. It's beautiful. Like, we're getting quilts made for every bed, so it's not, I mean, it is an institution, and there's medically assisted detox and a lot there, but it's also feels, it's beautiful and it's human, and there's going to be a
yes.
garden, and there's going to be fresh food and 24/7 access, and no one will leave there without a path. They might not need to be
Yes.
admitted, but they will be connected to the next resource they need in a real way, not like, here's the business card of the person that's too busy to help you, which is then where
Yeah.
people often slip up. So it's really incredible, but you're right. There's a real privilege to just having access to good health insurance, a good job, a good family, that's
Yeah.
not going to like, my family was never going to let me slip through the cracks. It just wasn't going to happen.
Yeah. And
And,
I'm very fortunate as well. I had support from my loved ones, my family. I had recently, like I said, relocated to New York City and I was no longer hanging out with fellow bartender party girls anymore. So I don't know that I would have gotten sober if I stayed in Texas. I think, it's they say not to quote unquote pull a geographic, which means like move. If you move, your problems will
right.
go away. For me, that actually worked. I needed to get away from a really toxic situation that I was in. I needed that. Like I say, everyone has their own path. Whatever works for you, amazing.
Yeah. And I agree, because, my fiance does AA, and it's incredible for her, and goes to meetings. And for us, back to that sobriety thing, we were merging, we each had brought two kids into this, scenario, which can be challenging.
It's
And,
a lot.
for the
Yeah.
most part, it's gone well, but that's also part of that language of sobriety and emotional honesty, where you talk about the things that come up, and you talk about them in a fair way and in an honest way, in an emotional way, uh, not, angry, not fighting. But, and we sort of joke, we're like, when's the first fight? But it's just so embedded in our fabric, the nature of how to communicate, and sort of, emotional sobriety, that we're like, well, someday we'll probably have like a disagreement.
Well, and like, yeah, I have that chapter in my book, How to Fight. Like, it teaches you how to fight properly, how to have an adult, a
Right.
mature disagreement. How, I give sample conversations of how to navigate these day to day, how to talk about doing the dishes. I wasn't taught that. And I was very passive aggressive. And when I was in relationships in the past, and I had to learn through therapy, through couples therapy, how to have healthy relationships, how to have healthy discussions, and learn that it's okay to fight. It's okay to disagree. It's actually healthy
Yeah.
to fight and disagree. If you're not fighting, then someone's withholding.
I'm going to go have a
Someone's
disagreement when we're done, just to make sure like we cover that.
yes, yes, have your scheduled fight.
Yeah. I mean, I've kind of been a butt this week because I've like been in pain. So we did have a
Rightfully
conversation
so.
about like, you're not like, just tell me how you're feeling. Don't pretend you have to be like doing all the stuff. Cause it's like hard for me to sit around while the kids are here and they need stuff and
Yeah,
sitting down. I just is not my way as a parent because I'm a
I
super
know.
involved parent. And it's like you're washing the dishes every night. And I mean, this too shall
I get
pass,
it.
but yeah. So
And
I had to,
it's I'm glad that you honored that. Yes, you went through this surgery and it's I mean, one of the most invasive surgeries you can have. And it also impacts the caretaker. Your fiance she's having to do more around the house because of this. And this is what I'm talking about, where it's like, if we're not talking about these things, then that's where resentment builds and it's going to fester and it's going to grow. So you have to talk about it.
100%. And it is, I think it's more invasive a surgery than I thought. But the weirdest part is when they cauterize and there's just smoke coming up from between your legs. I'm like, are you electing the Pope? Like, what is happening like down there with the smoke
Yeah.
situation? I mean, I knew that was coming, but it is sort of like, yeah, I know the phrase where there's smoke, there's fire. So it's making me
Yeah.
like a little small amount nervous here.
You're awake the whole time it's happening?
Yeah, it just was Novocaine.
Wow.
My 11-year-old, technically my stepdaughter, but I don't think that way. She's like, "Are they cutting your penis off?" I was like, "No, that's not." So like, but we're like a sex positive house and we're an information
Yeah.
based house. So I'm like, I go, Dr. Google, and here's like the diagram and all that. So this is what's gonna happen because
No, that's
you,
great. I
you
mean,
gotta know.
I
And
remember that's important that you're doing that, because like I remember my mom had me look at my vulva in the mirror when I was younger and told me what this is, what it does, the proper names of the body parts. I Because of that, I did not have any internalized sexual shame. Like, a lot of women are culturally stigmatized to be embarrassed of their genitals. And I'm so grateful that I didn't have that, because I was taught about that in the same way I was taught about my arm and my leg,
yeah, those conversations have happened here. I'm not leading them.
Great.
I'm sticking with my genre on that
Yes,
with
smart.
the male folk. Sometimes we have our lane, as we say in my house, and that's
Of
definitely going to stay
course.
in my lane on that. But those conversations do happen, and it is just super important. It's super important also because we live in such a predatory society, especially towards women, but also
Hmm.
any kid really now. And not like knowledge is just super important, and it seems like the climate we live in now is just anti any kind of correct information about bodies and
Yes.
the range that gender exists in. I mean, it's a hard time, and it's an interesting time to try and be raising young people because it feels really heavy a lot of the time, like what's
Yeah.
going on.
I'm sure. I mean, we don't have kids yet. We just adopted a 4-month-old puppy. This is our trial run to see how we do co-parenting the puppy. It's going pretty well so far.
In some ways, babies are easier than puppies because at least they like poop in their diaper at first. So you're not in
Yeah,
January like, oh God, it's like 20 below and I gotta
got
go
to go
outside.
outside.
You can at least
Yeah,
change the diaper
that's
in the
true.
house. Though diapers in a New York City apartment might get kind of intense, but puppies are good too. I have a cat now because it's a little easier to just go away for a night or two with a cat.
Yeah, well, we have both. I'm a cat person. He's a dog person, and I'm always going to have a cat. He's always going to have a dog. So we will always have both.
And kind of related to the pre like pet kid thing, you talk about body image and sobriety in your book. And can you just touch on that? Because I think there's so
Yeah.
many super important things in that your book. It is short, but it is mighty.
And that was intentional. It's a little over 200 pages. I wanted it to be easy to read, digestible, and also you can kind of flip. You don't have to read it front to back. You can hop around. Yeah, so body image, that was huge for me. Though I had a sex positive mother, I still was socialized as a woman. I still grew up in the South. I still had these societal projections placed on me because of my gender. So a lot of my sobriety journey was actually unpacking what all of that actually meant, figuring out what I like sexually versus what society's told me I should like. And there was a lot of time, like I talk about in the book, like I faked orgasms because I saw in porn what I thought was supposed to happen. And then when that wasn't happening, I was like, oh, well, something's wrong with me. I need to put on a show. And, that really fucked me up. And it hindered my ability to have good sex. I mean, I had fun, don't get me wrong, but it was more performative than it was for me. So, and a lot of that was embracing my body, learning how to love my body, learning to accept what my body looks like, and know that I deserved love, that my body deserves love. I was raised by a single mom. My dad wasn't around. So any male attention, I soaked it up. It was, that was just so much of the deep work that I had to do. Like we were talking about earlier, you quit drinking, but then like the real work is figuring out why you drank. That was a big part of it, figuring out how, I misused sex. I used sex as a form of validation, and instead of as a beautiful way to connect with someone and explore each other's bodies and have a fun, positive, healthy experience. That's still pretty new for me. I didn't have that until I quit drinking. So, and it's like, I know you asked about body image, but it's all so connected, especially for women, learning how to love ourselves and learning how to not need alcohol, that elusive liquid courage, learning how to not need that before a date or before sex it was really, really hard, which is why I wrote this book, because the thought of dating, let alone hooking up, scared the hell out of me. So I really wanted this book to be digestible and fun, because the conversation is not necessarily fun.
Right.
And the title, I wanted the title to be fun. I wanted you to laugh when you pick up the book from a bookstore, and then you're like, oh, okay, yeah.
I mean, it's brilliant. It is a brilliantly clever, funny title. Now, what did the publisher say with the title?
I had to fight to keep it. My agent loved the title. My editor loved the title. The publisher was apprehensive. They did not know that people would get the joke, especially for the UK publication. So I talked to a couple of my friends that are from the UK, and I was like, what is this? Like, what do you think of this title? They're like, oh, it's brilliant.
Do you dry hump in the UK?
Like, yeah, like people will get it. People will get this joke. So, I'm so grateful my editor fought for it. And it's, every time, like you said, that you love the title, it reminds me of that, how I had to fight for it, because I'm open. If you have another title, go for it. But I was like, come up with a better title than Dry Humping.
And I dare you. I dare the
yeah.
dog dare you to come up with a better title than that. I mean, it's interesting on my side of sort of the body image thing is, having two daughters, but just as a man that's like programmed, I had to work like really hard, and and this is true on like my being heterosexual, being white, trying to like really fight against all that stuff that's like privilege and just sexism and racism and homophobia that's all just like pushed on us. And as men, really, in white men and white heterosexual men, like told like you're kind of the exalted, which is totally insane to me, but it was like a lot of work to be honest about it and then move on from it, which is, I think, sometimes where people are like, caught up in, dealing with like racism. I'm like, no, I'm white and I have privilege. I can work against
Yes.
that, or I can be like, oh, that makes me uncomfortable, moving on. I choose to like work against that, because I think if we all do that, the world's going to be better and not worse. Or, there's
Yes.
those people who just throw like fuel on that fire, which is the current state of being right now.
The current climate. One of my day jobs when I moved here, I worked for and I worked in a men's retail store, and it was such a mind-blowing experience to help men find clothing, help them get the right sizes, have those fitting room. I was used to having fitting room conversations with women, but having fitting room conversations with men was it really blew my mind to learn like, oh, men have insecurities too. But it was almost like the opposite, where, women want the size smaller, men want the bigger size.
Men
So,
go for the giant shirt that
yes.
somehow, yeah, one of the guys I interviewed owns a men's store in Ithaca, Sam, and he's a sober guy. And we had a great interview on here, but it's talking about fit and all that stuff. But guys like go for the circus tent.
Yes.
Somehow they don't think that giant gap at the bottom of their stomach, like, does it. But it is, I think, right, this whole abs, all this stuff, it really, there's just a lot of body stuff of people
Yeah.
don't look like that unless they have enough money to work out all day,
Yes.
basically get paid to work out. My things, until I really hurt a knee, was I was 1,000-mile-a-year runner in early sobriety, and crazy about the gym, which is also a really common sobriety thing. People get like
Yep.
wackadoodle exercise city.
You
So
got to
then
put that energy somewhere else.
you do,
That was me.
and there's worse places to put it for sure,
Yes.
till your old knees catch up with you. But at the same time, and like my daughter has given me permission to talk about this, my 15-year-old, she struggled with an eating disorder. And that's also informed for me a lot of understanding body and fighting against sort of what society tells me I should be attracted to, was like
Yeah.
living through that, which is a terrifying experience as
Mm.
a parent. 100% terrifying, difficult, but also privileged, because we had the resources to pay for all the stuff,
Yeah.
right, that a lot of people don't have. I mean, it was 4 therapies a week of varying like group and individuals and parents and all this stuff.
Yeah.
Like, to get that time from work, to get that ability to do it, is totally privilege.
It's, I went through something similar with my mother. She developed an eating disorder going through menopause, and it's apparently very common for pre and postmenopausal women to develop eating disorders because your body is mimicking puberty. And I had no idea how common it was. And I was with her for the whole process of getting into rehab, doing all of this work. You have to really want to get better. There's so much red tape you have to jump through. Even if you were saying we're privileged enough to have these resources, you still have to jump through an insane amount of red tape just to get the actual help that you need.
Yeah, and even the access to, on sheer numbers, like mental health beds in the county where Ithaca is at the hospital, there's 8 adolescent inpatient beds.
Wow.
You would hope to keep any adolescent out of that, but there's certainly more than 8 kids at any time
Yes.
in that county that need it. Or the facility where I'm on the board, that's 40 beds. It's for 8 counties.
Wow.
That's going to fill up in a heartbeat, and then not even begin to address the need. I mean,
Yeah.
40 beds is super small. I mean, another incredible thing about that facility is people are able to identify with not their gender at birth, but the gender with which
Hmm.
they identify. Had to get a special waiver from the state for that. It's one of the first facilities in New
Wow.
York, actually, that will allow that. And then there's sort of flex space for people who don't feel comfortable in either area. So that's like an incredible component of that. It's progressive and because, right, why do people fall into addiction? There are a lot of reasons, but if you don't feel like your body is right for you and you live in a
Mhm.
society that's telling you all these things are wrong, what are you going to do? You have to find some
Yes.
way to survive.
That's so real. And as you saw in my book, I actually interviewed several trans sober people who talked about having eating disorders because it it manifests like that because you want to change your body in some way. You want to change your body. You don't care how you do it. You may not have the language. You may not know you're trans. You may not know what you dislike, but you know you want something to change. And eating disorders are very common within the trans community, like other addictions, drugs, alcohol, sex addiction. People are just trying, they're just trying to get by. And if they don't have, I'm so grateful that you sound like a great father who's well educated on the issues. That gives me so much hope that that these kids are being raised in such a loving, positive home, and affirming home. That's so important.
Yeah, I think it's huge. I mean, one of my mottos is just to try not to suck as a human being. Just try and have empathy and look
Yes.
at, put yourself in their shoes for a minute. And just, if it's hard to like interact with them, maybe it's really hard to be them.
Yep.
Right.
Exactly.
So just flip the lens. Maybe that's like not even the right metaphor, but it is. It's that walk in someone else's shoes. And I feel like
Yeah.
right now in our culture, if we could do that a little more, could talk a little more. Okay. I always feel
Hmm.
like mostly people are going to agree we love our kid. On the soccer field where I live, there's probably not a lot of people who agree with my politics, but we're all there for this thing. And
Yeah.
so maybe that's at least a place to start until somebody comes in and
Absolutely.
decides to like blow a flamethrower everywhere and like light it up on the differences.
Yeah.
One other part of your book, too, you talked about Parks and Rec in your book. I fucking love that show beyond measure. That was part of like the eating disorder thing for us, was that show. You
Watch
know,
Parks and Rec.
watch Parks and Rec and then Schitt's Creek, like all the incredible shows.
Yes.
So interesting and like beautiful. They're weird and they're goofy, but they're really kind of about love in the end. Like
Yeah.
if you distill those shows down, I just had to touch on Parks and Rec because I also have just such a deep love of that show.
I love that stood out to you. It's such a good show. What do I say about Parks and Rec? Is it when I talk about being like Chris Drager?
Yeah.
Yeah, I because we talk, like we just said, like getting super into running. For if people listening who don't know Parks and Rec, Chris Traeger is Rob Lowe's character, who I love his character arc so much.
Yeah.
He's this, I would say, blindingly optimistic, annoying character who's just obsessed with exercise and constantly moving. And then, he has this character arc when he finally realizes what he's running from,
Yeah.
and I I hadn't seen that portrayed before. And I just thought that the writing was so brilliant. Rob Lowe performed it so well. And the fact that they did it with comedy, that really helped me. It helped me understand myself, because it's like I am, my default mode is like 110%. And, he has this funny line in the show when it's, what is it like, if I stop moving, I'll fall into a pit of despair or something. Like,
Yeah.
that was me. I could not stop moving. And I signed up for a half marathon. My first summer without alcohol, I was like, I'm gonna run a half marathon. And and I'm so glad I did that, because it gave me something to do. It gave me, running is, you can't just do it like casually. If you're training for something like a half marathon, you have to eat right, you have to get a lot of rest, you have to go to bed early. And I needed that kind of structure in early sobriety.
Yeah. Before this, I was in the kitchen just saying literally
Yeah.
to the almost
Literally.
yeah, to the almost 7-year-old who was looking at me like I was crazy, but I liked it. I was entertained by myself in that moment. Um, and then in Schitt's Creek too, the notion all these people in this wacky way. Like everyone in that town cares in their own sort of funny way. And that show really also in its arc really changed, and
Yeah.
there's in depth, and those characters are just so kind of incredible in that show that recommend it to anybody.
Yes, definitely.
Is there any part of your book that you wanted to touch on that I haven't asked you about? And also hype your book on how people can get it.
I will say that the thesis of my book is about helping the reader cultivate intrinsic courage and replacing liquid courage. That's the bread and butter right there. That was the big thing for me, with learning how to cultivate genuine confidence in myself instead of relying on a drink to make me become this different version of who I was. That was a bulk of that self work that we talk about. And that's as you know, that's the through line of the book. I talk about what liquid courage is. I go into the history of liquid courage. I talk about how it shows up on film and television, the trope of liquid courage, and it really examines how it shows up in society, and then how we internalize that, even on shows as progressive as like Sex and the City and the L Word. I'm like, if Carrie Bradshaw needs a drink, what the fuck am I supposed to do?
Right, I should have a drink.
Like, yeah, like if she needed 2-for-1 margaritas to have an uncomfortable conversation with the guy she was dating, and I was like, well, what am I supposed to do then? She is the Sexpert. She has a sex column. She's so fabulous. She wears all these cool shoes. If she needs a drink, then I need a drink. And I'm not blaming Sex and the City. It's one of my favorite shows. I know it by heart. It's disgusting. It's more of a commentary on, that's just the zeitgeist. That's the conversation, and it's represented in all of these shows and in pop culture. So that interests, if you're a listener and that interests you at all, that's a big bulk of the book. And it's available for pre-order. You can buy it. Just Google Dry Humping book or Dry Humping Tawny Lara, and you'll
Not
find
on
it
your work
on
computer.
Amazon.
Do it on your home computer.
Yes. Thank you for that. Or at least use incognito mode. use the porn tab. You can buy it's on Amazon. It's everywhere. And I didn't realize, I'm just going to step on a soapbox real quick. I didn't realize how important pre-orders were until I became an author. Pre-orders help the publisher know how many books to print. It really helps books become a bestseller. Bestsellers are based on the first 1 to 2 weeks of sales. So everything that is in that pre-order period, that counts towards that. So the more successful a debut author's first book can be, it can lead to more books. And really just and it's bigger than the book. It's really like, to get this conversation out there. Let's normalize alcohol-free sex and dating. Pre-order one for yourself, pre-order one for your friend. I'm really excited that this book is going to be out there and people can examine the role alcohol plays in their dating lives. Whether, as I interviewed, it's not just sober people. I interviewed normal drinkers.
Yeah.
I interviewed sober curious. I interviewed therapists. I interviewed neurologists to learn how alcohol actually works in the brain. I really went there.
Yeah, you might get an end cap in Barnes and Noble, because that'd be cool. Probably not in Florida. You're gonna get banned. You're gonna get like banned there, like a hot second. But that's sort of a weird badge of honor. But a dry humping end cap in Barnes and Noble would be pretty dope.
That would be amazing.
It would be super amazing.
I hope my book gets banned, because banned books sell more copies. So yeah. Whatever.
Though you do want people to read them too, in some of those places that really need them. So
yes, I mean, exactly. And thankful for audiobooks and ebooks. So if you're embarrassed and you don't want to be seen reading a certain book, you can have it on your Kindle. You can have it in an audiobook. I co-host a podcast called Recovery Rocks, where we talk about recovery and rock and roll. There's so many wonderful resources out there, and I'm really grateful that you gave me the platform to share and have this conversation.
Oh, you're totally welcome. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. For more information, for links to any music or books we talked about, or to buy some Sober Dad Crew merchandise, please visit soberdadcrew.com.